Did you say you violated? That seems the essence of tyranny, a lawless state. But beyond that, the possibility, I think it's an assault on free speech.
Yeah.
So it seems as though they really are reversing freedoms that we have going back, in the case of the Fifth Amendment, to the Magna Carta.
And from what I heard today in the hearing, it seemed like not only could they be detaining people, but that the military decides who's a journalist and who isn't a journalist. Because they asked the question about...
Well, there are many separate. There's the question, what is substantive action? What are the associated groups?
Yeah.
And who counts as a journalist?
Substantial.
Where are the bloggers? And of course, they'll try to show that Julian Assange is not a journalist in the covered sense. So...
well, that was my other question. Now they've made WikiLeaks an enemy of the state, the
They
government.
described it in those terms. But for that matter, they really think of the public in those terms.
Correct.
Or certainly when I was in the Pentagon, if an Air Force person talked about the enemy, you know who he was talking about, and it didn't speak Russian. It was Navy. Essentially Army, but Navy.
So can you tell me a little bit about, you've been... The power of the executive, 1971, let's say, to now, how would you say was the difference between now and 1971 when the Pentagon Paper trial happened?
Well, the president, in order to keep me quiet about things that went beyond the Pentagon Papers, which ended in '68 before he came in, he was so afraid that I would give documents about crimes and lies that he'd made that he took many efforts to keep me silent, most of which are now legalized.
Correct, yeah.
Like going into my former doctor's office to blackmail me, sending people to beat me up, unwarranted wiretaps, and use of the CIA against me, known to name several, all of which are essentially legalized now. The death squad part hasn't been formally legalized, but the president is pronouncing it as though it's a proud aspect of his
he has a kill
functions.
list.
And use of the CIA in the doctor's office or my reputation is legal under the Patriot Act. So the president now would not even have to bother to obstruct justice by covering that up, as Nixon did, would not face impeachment for those reasons. At the same time, I would say, like Bush, Obama has conducted clear-cut impeachable crimes, violation of the Constitution, Article Section 1, Section 8, by going into Libya without even pretending to consult, and by continuing, basically, turning over people to torture, known torture in Iraq and Afghanistan, and refusing to investigate. In both cases, he's failing his obligation to execute the laws. I'm told that no politician has ever been sanctioned for violating his oath to support and uphold the Constitution. Are you aware of any?
No,
but
I don't.
It
I'm
means
not aware
it's just
of any,
meaningless words.
Right.
When I made that oath, it wasn't meaningless words to me, and I felt, looking back, that I had violated that oath when I had been quiet about the fact that the Congress was being lied to. Later, it seemed to me I was distinctly upholding my oath. But either way, it appears there's no one to measure that and no one to do anything about it.
Can you talk a little bit about that, the feelings and the experience that preceded your decision to blow the whistle and release the Pentagon Papers?
It's a long story. I wrote a book about that called Secrets, so I have to recapitulate. By identify with Bradley Manning, a large part of your identity is being trusted by respectable people to keep their secrets for them, to be selected for that, to be a trustworthy person,
Do you feel
keeping
that it's
promises.
different because you were a civilian and he was still enlisted? Is it different with Bradley Manning? Because he was enlisted at the time and you were a civilian.
The only difference is in the oath you take, which is that his oath does mention the commander-in-chief and obeying the orders of the UCMJ. You might think that applied to officers because they're also subject to it, but it doesn't. It only mentions upholding the Constitution. And of course, for both enlisted and officers, orders or the regulations have the force of criminal laws. That's not true for civilians.
But I think a big difference also is the public opinion now. That there isn't, because Obama is a Democrat somehow, liberals have gone silent about things like torture and Bradley Manning.
No, I think that it's easier, unhappily, it's proven easier for the president to get away with prosecuting 6, going on 7 or 8 people on First Amendment, on the Espionage Act. I think there'd be much more of an outcry if Bush were doing that, though I'm not sure it would make any difference. He got away with anything he wanted to. What exactly was it that the Democrats stopped him from doing that he wanted to do?
Mm-hmm.
I think that
They didn't stop. There was more of an outcry. There was more of an outcry, but
there's more of
it
an
didn't
outcry.
stop.
I think Social
Security,
Security, they pretty much stopped him.
Yeah.
But in terms of liberties, I'm not aware of his getting any significant opposition.
Right. So, but now it seems that Obama is legalizing and extending the powers that Bush took under
He is
post 9/11.
He is going further than Bush actually went, but it's the same kind of thing.
My question is, given the fact that Obama is now appointing new cabinet members, do you see any hope in any of the new cabinet members that some of these, that the NDAA will be addressed in any way other than it's already been?
Well, I thought that the appointment of Hagel was very promising on a number of grounds. And just for the last few years, Hagel has stood out in my mind, Republican or Democrat, as somebody who was really able to speak forthrightly against the wars and against the idea that Israel's interest is not identical to that of the United States. That's why he's getting so much opposition. I don't count a whole lot on that making a big siege when he gets in. A lot of officers look at Gore and the fate of the earth before he was vice president. We didn't get much benefit out of that when he was actually vice president.
Would you ever consider being the Department of Defense secretary?
No.
Why not?
No, first of all, I don't have the talents for that. I don't have the executive ability.
But you do believe in peace.
Yes, but that's a disqualification.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we've been losing our guaranteed freedoms one by one for at least the last dozen years. They've been chipped away even long before that. And what's happening now is that they're being open about law breaking that was previously covert. They're inviting the public to react to that. And in the absence of any real public reaction or congressional investigation, they're making a bipartisan norm out of things like torture and rendition rather, and in particular the universal surveillance. So I think now with this NDAA, the idea that the president has an unlimited power to kill as well as to detain indefinitely, it's a little hard to distinguish between those. Death in life in some small cell somewhere is one thing, and actually killing somebody is not necessarily worse. And the president is claiming the right to do that to any American or not, anywhere in the world.
Right.
It's an unlimited power.
One thing is, I don't think that anyway, no matter fact, they've done it before. If they want to eliminate someone,
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing
they've
you.
done
Saying
it
they've been
before.
doing it
If they want to eliminate someone, they'll do it on their own, don't you think? They will do it on their own.
That they're already doing it. The government's already doing it and has been doing
Okay, I'm
it.
not sure I'm understanding you, but of course the danger of these things is not the way the public thinks, that they're directed simply at people who are engaged in harming the United States or endangering them. The whole point of the banning, outlawing torture and assassination is the large number, the preponderance of people who are suspected of this. And people say, well, of course torture works. If they tortured me, I'd tell them everything. They don't ask the question, and what if I didn't know the answer? You'd tell them anything anyway, and flood the system. For every person who knows anything, there's 10 people who will tell them false things that will be just as good leads, meaning that their likelihood of pursuing real criminals is less rather than before. Meanwhile, enraging, creating terrorist opponents in revenge. I don't know if that addresses what you were saying.
What do you think is driving? What do you think is driving the government to continue its forceful, pushing of these policies?
Yes, on the one hand, I didn't expect Obama, who I voted for first and second time, I didn't expect him to change the policies of Bush with respect to civil liberties. I don't know of any president who has actually renounced abusive powers that were given to him as a president. It takes the Congress and it takes courts and public to do that, and they haven't done that. But another question is, why, that I've asked everybody for a long time, why has the president conducted 6 indictments, twice as many as any other before, for leaking, of which mine was the first? And 6 is even misleading because I believe there's a 7th. Do you know about that?
It's no.
Hey, guy's Judge's name? Name starts with H, and he took some documents to him and put them in an account that he wasn't entitled. It's the 7th indictment. It hasn't gotten a lot of publicity. And Assange, of course, would be the 8th. The best guess I've heard is it's certainly not because he's more concerned about leaks than other presidents, because all the presidents are ferocious about leaks and they hate leaks. It isn't just because he has, it's post 9/11, because Bush had that. So why wasn't Bush doing all these things? And I think two things that have changed are, one, that he's a Democrat and he can get away with it with much less liberal criticism than Bush. If Bush had done the same, he might have gone away, just done it, but he would have had more political heat about it. And the technique for tracing the leaks is better every day, every week. Their ability to check the emails, the GPS, the credit cards, and to show what the contacts were with journalists and confront the officials with, why were you seeing this guy on this day, and so forth. I think that either a Republican or a Democrat would and could exploit that, but we have a Democrat now who can do it even more easily. The next president it'll just be routine. What they haven't done yet is call full-scale mainstream journalists in. The words of the act that was used against all of these cases and me apply just as much to journalists and to secretaries and to readers of the document who are holding a classified document in their hands and hand it to somebody else. The act applies exactly as much to them. Now, they haven't used that as much at all, presumably because they're afraid it would be found unconstitutional and lose their whole act.
But they have said in Bradley Manning hearings that it would be exactly the same if they give it to New York Times. Right.
And in Bradley's case, he's as special as military. They can make a regulation and send him to prison for breaking it. But I think that they're going after Assange in part on the grounds that they're hoping some journalists will disown him as a journalist and say, well, it doesn't affect us, it doesn't affect journalists, and there won't be as much sympathy. And of course, they're spending as much effort as they can to denigrate both Manning and Assange on personal grounds, gender grounds.
Dan, do you think that 9/11 was a false flag like the vote for Tompkins so that we could go?
No, I haven't been convinced by that. I think there's no question at all that the administration jumped on 9/11 and exploited it in exactly indistinguishably the way from the Nazis exploiting the Reichstag fire within 24 hours. It's still, to this day, there's a controversy of whether the fire was actually set by the Nazis. There are arguments on both sides. But they haven't really determined that. But there's no, and the same is true, amazingly enough, of the Maine. There isn't 100% certainty how the Maine went down in Havana Harbor 100 years ago. But but their use of it to create a war is clear enough. It was clearly conspiratorial.
What do you think is the discrepancy between the threat that actually exists of Al-Qaeda and what the government is making all these things about aiding the enemy and the fear of...
Well, the aiding the enemy charge, I think, I say as a layman, seems to me on its face unconstitutional even for a military man, with no element of intent or intent to harm the United States or hurt the foreign power or adhere to a foreign power. Just to say that something I say may find its way usefully is to Kate is ridiculous. That's true of every page of every newspaper in the country.
Do you think the threat is really as great as the government would like us to believe?
The what?
Is the threat really as great as the government would like us to believe?
They're trying to do exactly what our founders tried not to do, and that is to expand the word treason or seditious libel to cover everybody. I remember when Haig had it, many people think of the president as commander-in-chief, and he's acting like one for everybody, as if we were all in the army, like Bradley Manning.
How military law seems to apply to
us
all.
With the NDAA, I could be put in a military cell, even though I was a civilian, the same way Bradley Manning. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's the intent of the statute, is to basically militarize our civil justice system. That's why.
Who said that?
That's the intent of the statute. There's no question that that's what they're after, is to bring to bear the power of the military to create a separate military justice system within the United States. And that's what's so dangerous about the NDAA. Because, for example, the NDAA says that people can be detained, quote, until the end of hostilities. When exactly is that? We're now day 1,463 into, I'm sorry, 4,163, 11 years and over 5 months into this war. And no one has defined when it will end. And, basically, for the first time, a military lawyer suggested that they might think about when it ends, but he said that even the fact that the top leadership of Al-Qaeda has been either killed or disbanded doesn't qualify for that for the end of the war, which would typically, if you were fighting a foreign power and their top leadership has been killed or disbanded, you would be arriving at the end of hostilities. So when the NDAA says you can detain someone in a military prison until the end of hostilities, that is what tyrants use to put away their enemies potentially forever.
And the enemy has traditionally been a nation state, and now that it's sort of this shadowy organization that's everywhere,
right,
we don't really have any legal precedent for how it ends.
And that's why they're trying to, first of all, that's why they're trying to create as much law as they can to give the military as much power as they can, and to use the apparatus of the national security agencies on the domestic population, which there was a clear line that one couldn't do that in the 1970s. That line has now been severed. So now you have not just warrantless wiretapping conducted by foreign intelligence agencies, you've got drones for the first time in American skies. It's all part of one piece, unfortunately, and that piece is more and more uses of the military domestically, to the point where now they even want to militarize our civil justice system, which is the essence of what we are as a nation, is a separate civil justice system, not one that's under the control of the military. So all this is going in a very dangerous direction.
So what can the public do?
Well, they can get involved with the lawsuit effort here. Go to the website stopndaa.org. They can get involved in similar efforts that involve litigation and protest movements, of which there are a number throughout the country now, rather than thinking they've done their civic duty just by going to the polls and voting for the Democrat who's going to turn around and use the laws against them that he said he would oppose. So, that's not the end of your civic duty. So, Mr. Ellsberg voted for Obama, but he's also out there as a plaintiff in a lawsuit against him because he realizes that's not the end of your civic duty.
What are the things? I mean, what are you assuming that could happen in the near future? If you have such a worry.
Well, I'll give you an example. And I was just reading these statutes the other day. There's been an effort in the country in the last 5 to 6 months by a group called ALEC, which is a branch of the corporate, it's a corporate outfit that creates state laws. And they've created a new set of laws called agro-terrorism laws, which actually makes it an act of terrorism to go into a chicken plant or a beef plant or some industrial commercial place and expose what's going on inside. That's considered terrorism, right? For my entire life, that's been considered journalism, and now it's terrorism. So they're trying to vacuum up as much as possible under the ambit of the military, the powers of the state,
so,
and that's really antithetical to our
democracy. Does it seem that it looks like the corporate power is taking over everything?
Mm-hmm.
In many respects.
And we have a corporate media, so it's not necessarily in their interest to talk about the NDAA.
Okay, we have no more.
Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.